Hello everyone, this is Joanne Russell and we are here today at marriedtoasexaddict.com with Barbara Steffens, author of Your Sexually Addicted Spouse, How Partners Can Cope and Heal. This is part one of a four-part series of interviews with Barbara Steffens. Hello Barbara and welcome.
Thanks, Joanne. And, I can't thank you enough just for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here, and I know that everyone on the site has been anxiously waiting to hear you talk about your new book and your ideas of how partners of sex addicts experience trauma from the betrayal of their relationship.
Well, I'm excited as well. As I've told you, this is my passion to help support and encourage and advocate for the needs of partners that I think have gone unaddressed for too long.
Yes, I really agree. First, I'd like to give our listeners just a little background on our guest. Barbara is a licensed professional clinical counselor, a supervising counselor, a certified clinical sexual addiction specialist, an author, a speaker, a presenter, and a trainer. Her book, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse, How Partners Can Cope and Heal, which she co-authored with Marcia Means, was released last fall and is available on Amazon.com. Barbara, can you share with us how this book came about and why you decided to co-author it with Marcia Means?
Sure. It was a long process, but the book is based on my doctoral research. The research itself took place between 2004 and 2005. And after that, I had published, of course, my dissertation and then a professional journal article. And I had spoken at several conferences on the topic of partners and trauma, promoting the idea that partners being identified as co-addicts was just not helpful for partners. Well, Marcia and I had met years before at a conference, and she had kind of kept tabs on what I was doing, and I was doing the same. And she came across my research, and she now tells me that once she read it, it was a big aha for her, and she started to incorporate that in her own treatment of
great.
partners. And she had written a book before called Living with Your Husband's Secret Wars. It was really one of the only books I would regularly recommend to partners that I was working with.
Yes, I've read that. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's a good book. But she was ready to write another book. So she called me and said, I'm going to write about your material. I can do it by myself, or I can defer if you're going to write a book, or would you be interested in writing one together? And I absolutely jumped at the opportunity to collaborate with Marcia. She's a good writer, a good clinician, and it was just a great working experience. So we found as we were working on this together that we have a real connection and real similar viewpoints on how to help partners. But my original research, that came out of many years of working with partners of sex addicts and really hearing the trauma and the devastation as they describe their disclosure experience and then their ongoing experience trying to live with a sex addict.
Yes.
My background as a clinician, as a mental health counselor, really prepared me to hear what the partners were saying, not through the lens of an addiction model, but through the lens of someone who had been through a life crisis or a traumatic event. So as the women described to me in some pretty graphic details the trauma they experienced, it really made sense to me that the books that I had read and talking to a partner about being co-addicted didn't make any sense at all. Right. What I saw as a mental health clinician was trauma. And so that's when I went back to get my doctorate, I decided to do research on the partner.
That is just fantastic. I read your book. I think it is just absolutely wonderful. But one of the things that I really missed in your book was your own personal story. At times there are brief references to Marcia's struggle with her husband's sexual addiction, but if I remember correctly, there was only a passing mention of your own personal experiences. Could you give our listeners just a little background on your story?
Okay. Yeah, well, that was intentional in me not sharing my story in the book. Marcia's husband had gone very public about his struggle. She was also no longer married to him. And as my husband and I talked about the process of writing a book, we both decided that I would not put his story in print. And if I tell my story, in effect, that's telling part of his as well. And I always figure that's his story to tell.
Sure.
But he does speak publicly about it. We're very open about it with our friends and have spoken at some conferences together. Basically, my story is probably about 14 or 15 years old now. I had my point of crisis when everything changed for me. I was on the computer one day and just looking innocently for something and came up with just page after page of pornographic material.
Oh my.
And being a trained mental health clinician, I had somewhat of an idea of what I was finding out about. But I had that experience of being totally blindsided, shocked. As more things came out, I realized, how long this had been going on, how long I had been deceived.
Yes.
It absolutely shook me to my core. My husband is one who embraced recovery, and as far as I can tell, over the past 14 years, has not looked back, but has done everything that he has needed to do. And he is really a different person now.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So at the time, I went searching for, an answer and help, and all the books that I read at the time called me a co-addict just based on my relationship with my husband. And I never bought that. It never made sense. In fact, it made me mad, and I wanted to pitch the books.
That's exactly how I felt.
I just wanted to pitch them or burn them. So that set me on a journey of trying to figure this stuff out for myself, but then in working with other people. I'll just share one funny little story. I knew a gentleman who was running groups for men, and I said, so where's the group for women? And he said, well, when are you going to start it? So that simple question is the one that kind of led me into this process where now working with partners of sex addicts is my specialty. I tell people it's not a specialty I chose, but it's a specialty that chose me.
Isn't that the way it's supposed to be?
I think that's the way it's supposed to be. For me, it's a God story.
Mm-hmm.
And my story now, a part I really like to share when I'm sharing my story is the story of hope.
Yes.
And it is a story of restoration. Unfortunately, that's not a common story. But it is for me, and I'm really grateful for that.
I think everyone has to have hope. And there is
Yeah.
hope. There is hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just may not be in the relationship. It may be in hope in how you are going to recover from this and how are you going to gain strength from this.
Exactly. There's hope for yourself, always.
Absolutely.
Right. Barbara, in your book, you talk about something called relational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Would you give our listeners just a little information about what relational trauma is?
Well, when I'm talking about relational trauma, I'm saying or describing that kind of trauma that happens with or as a result of being in a relationship with someone we trust, someone we're close to, and within that relationship, betrayal occurs and our trust is broken. That kind of betrayal, it absolutely attacks the security and the safety that we find in that relationship. So that person that we thought and we expected to be able to go to for security and safety, after the betrayal becomes an unsafe and risky person for us to be around.
Yes.
The attachment is threatened and we don't feel emotionally safe, and for a lot of partners they don't feel physically safe or secure any longer.
Mm-hmm.
And we've understood this kind of betrayal a lot around children. We've talked about the long-term effects of relationship trauma that occurs to children in the form of abuse, whether that be emotional abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse. And research is now starting to look at the effect of it on adult intimate relationships. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done. But in effect, what happens with relationship trauma is that person that was our closest friend is now our worst enemy.
Yes.
Someone that has hurt us worse than anyone that we ever thought was possible.
Yes. So, what is the relationship between relational trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD?
Okay. Well, there continues to be some disagreement in the trauma field as to whether or not betrayal in a relationship can be traumatic. Some researchers that I've read will call relationship trauma or betrayal a small t trauma. And then things like war or natural disasters or assault, they call those big T traumas. So they're differentiating on the kind of event. Well, any trauma survivor I have met who has also experienced the trauma of betrayal have said to me that the betrayal trauma is the worst because it comes to them as a surprise and in the safety and security of what they thought was a trusting relationship. We know that sexual assault victims, children who are abused, sexually abused by a close family member or friend, trusted person, not only do they have the trauma of the assault, but they have that additional complicating trauma of having the trust betrayed and violated.
Yes.
And I think that's what we see with partners of sex addicts who experience this as traumatic. There's that traumatic assault that happens of the information, but then there's that greater assault of the betrayal and the shattering of trust.
Yes.
So right now, if you look at the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, you probably wouldn't see relational trauma as one of those events necessary to have the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, because people would say it's not life-threatening. But again, just about any partner I have ever talked to said that's a bunch of baloney, because there's nothing more life-threatening than finding out that the person you love, that you live with, that you've given your life to, has been engaged in a secret life that has really put you in jeopardy in so many different ways. So in my opinion, it can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, but I imagine there'll be some clinicians who would really disagree with me.
And what types of symptoms do you see in your clients who are experiencing the relational trauma?
Okay, well, I see a lot of different kinds of symptoms. They're pretty common in that they're typical. And they're typical to people who are experiencing extreme stress. So I usually see things like, especially right after the disclosure, some shock, just kind of being in shock, some level of denial or disbelief. Usually there's incredible fear, even terror. They express feeling helpless. They feel unsafe emotionally and physically. A lot of times partners, people with relational trauma, will have physiological symptoms. I hear of women having the immediate response to vomit or feeling as if they could.
Yes, I had that.
Very, very frequently. I probably hear that as much as I hear the disbelief. They have maybe some other kinds of physiological problems like an intestinal distress. They have trouble focusing. I have spoken to a woman who, after disclosure, she couldn't read. She just couldn't comprehend words on a page. It just messed with her ability to concentrate and focus so severely. You can feel like you're in a fog, really confused. Some partners will even describe a sense of dissociation. That's kind of that feeling of being outside of your body and watching what's happening. Some people will lose memories of the events or the details around the events. They may have to ask the same question over and over again about what happened because their mind just can't keep it.
Sure.
They may actually forget. Most of the people that I have seen have a lot of trouble with intrusive thoughts or memories. They have pictures, smells, sounds invade their mind. It's not something they're seeking after. It just floods their mind. They might have terrible nightmares, and the nightmares can be based on things that actually happened, or the nightmares can be kind of their mind putting together pieces and trying to envision the things that they didn't see. So they'll have nightmares about what they think their husband was doing when he was acting out. Probably one of the most uncomfortable feelings for partners and people who've had relational trauma is that hypervigilance.
Yes.
There's this heightened anxiety and just awareness of your surroundings so that you can see a threat, a mile away. You're constantly scanning the environment for anything that might be frightening or might be a threat to your safety and security. So for a partner, it would look like, she and her husband are going out to dinner. You walk into the room, and the partner has already identified all the so-called threats in the room in terms of, people that she knows her husband might fantasize about.
Yes.
Or the hypervigilant might look like going to the computer history over and over again to try to find if there's something that is evidence of acting out. They feel on guard. They even react to maybe words or moods that they see in the addict that remind them maybe of the time of disclosure or what she now knows was his mood or things he said or did when he was acting out. Mm-hmm. So she'll feel as if it's happening again, even if it's not. And that can take quite a long time for that to calm down, for that hypervigilance to subside.
Yes, and really everyone that's written on my site experiences those same symptoms. I know I did, mm-hmm. And when you hear someone else talking about them, it's like they're telling your story.
Exactly.
Because they're just so similar.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really great that somebody comes out and says, this is normal. Because
well,
everyone was telling us it was abnormal.
Yeah, I know. Everyone was saying that it was abnormal or a sign of your sickness.
Absolutely.
And what I did was research to say, no, these are typical responses for someone who's experienced a trauma. I try not to use the word normal because there is absolutely nothing normal about this, but it is typical.
Yeah, typical, yes. I'll try to remember to use that word. Now, in your book, you show the similarity of symptoms between relational trauma victims and what some counselors would describe as codependency or co-addiction. So, how does a professional like yourself determine the difference between a trauma victim and a codependent or a co-addicted patient?
Well, first of all, to be totally honest, I don't use the word co-addict, period. I just don't use it. It's not in my vocabulary. And I also don't label people as codependents. Now, I will acknowledge that most of us do some codependent behaviors from time to time. Mm-hmm. I think that is absolutely true. But what I do with my partners that I work with is I look at the motivation or the purpose for the behavior. Why is she doing codependent kinds of things? Mm-hmm. And I find that people who've experienced trauma are looking to seek to control their environment or have some kind of control over being able to anticipate what might happen to them.
Yes.
So they're not doing these behaviors trying to control another person, which is what the co-addict model would say. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to control my husband. What I'm trying to do is control what happens to me. So it's safety seeking. It's all about trying to find a sense of safety.
Yes.
Now, I don't believe that all partners of sex addicts are traumatized, but I do believe a lot are. And I don't believe that all partners have codependent tendencies. Majority of the women that I have met, they do not. As soon as they know what has happened, they take a firm stand, they set boundaries, they try to do healthy things. Mm-hmm. So I rarely use the word. I will talk about maybe being over-responsible. I will talk with my partners about maybe how they learned to take responsibility for someone else's feelings and how, especially as women, we were socialized. But I find that these kinds of behaviors are generally learned. There's something we learn, so it's something we can unlearn. I don't believe it's a disease. I see the behaviors as a way to try to adapt to a crazy situation. Mm-hmm. So what I do is help them find maybe some more healthy ways of adapting to their situation that has a chance of helping them find safety and security.
Yes, yes.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
When I hear the terms codependent or co-addict, I feel that these terms not only imply some sort of compliance with, or at least acceptance of the addiction, But these terms also place a stigma and a negative label on the partner of a sex addict. Um, I'm just curious, why do you think there has been such a widespread acceptance of these terms among professional therapists?
Well, I think in the area of sexual addiction, it's been accepted because that was the only thing that was out there. Early on when sex addiction was first being discussed, and Patrick Carnes is, the first person that really brought it to the forefront and started to address it as a real disorder. Um, they were really coming from what we call a family disease model of understanding addiction. And in that model, they believe that it's not the individual with the disease of addiction, it's the family.
Yes.
Now, newer thought about addiction, say chemical dependency, alcoholism, they generally don't call the spouse or significant other a co-addict. Once in a while they may call them a codependent, but you don't see the term co-addict in current addiction literature except in the area of sexual addiction.
Yes. Yes.
So that, to me, was a big red flag. Why is it co-addict in sex addiction and it's not with any other kind of addictive behavior?
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, I needed to cough. So I don't see the partner's behaviors as symptoms of the family's disease. What I see it is behaviors that are demonstrated because the family is under distress.
Yes.
So again, it's ways of trying to adapt to a crazy situation. And I also think that when people first started writing about and understanding and researching sex addiction, their focus was on the sex addict. And then all of a sudden they had this messy partner come along who was acting out of control, kind of like the addict was out of control. So they said, aha, another out of control person. So this person must have their own addiction because this is what addicted people do. Now, I actually heard a pretty well-known sex addiction therapist say something very, very similar, that was kind of their position because they didn't know what to do with her. And treating her was always part of the process of treating the addiction. So it was like an add-on or an afterthought to try to help the addict. For me, I work with a partner as I would any other mental health client who has been through a life stressor and needs assistance. I don't do it as an adjunct to treating the sex addict. I treat her.
Oh,
So that's a long
fantastic.
answer to that question, but I hope that makes sense. And
It really
for
does make a
me,
lot of
it
sense.
put all the puzzle pieces together when I started to realize they just saw an out-of-control person and didn't know what to call her.
And because of the relationship between
Mm-hmm.
a sex addict, it's a very intimate relationship. It's not quite the same as a relationship with a drug addict or an alcoholic. And so,
Right.
and I think one of the most foolish things that my counselor kept saying to me was, don't take it personally. It's the
Yeah.
most personal thing that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the most personal kind of injury that you can experience.
Yes.
It's not about you, but it affects you.
Right. Um, Barbara, can you briefly describe the addiction model of treatment? You have mentioned that. That includes the 12-step programs, which is commonly used today to treat partners of sex addicts.
Okay. Well, again, I don't have a lot of experience here because I don't use the model, but in my reading and understanding and what I've heard from people, it really starts with the assumption that the person or the partner must admit their powerlessness over another person's behavior. And then what they do is try to help that partner address their own out-of-control behaviors.
Mm.
So the idea is to help the partner focus on their own issues and recover from their attempts to control another person's behaviors, which they would identify as the partner's disease.
Yes.
That they're addicted to the addict, and so their behaviors are signs and symptoms of their addiction to the addict.
Mm-hmm.
The problem here, in my opinion, is that the behavior of the partner generally is not about controlling another person's behavior, but as I said before, it's more about exercising control over her own environment and her own ability to feel safe and secure.
Yes.
What we know for trauma survivors, any other area of trauma, what they need is to be able to find places where they can exercise control and feel empowered again after the traumatic event.
Exactly.
So for me, the first step for a partner of an addict is counter to that. Rather than being powerlessness, what I want to be able to tell a partner is, where do you have power? Let's find places where you can exercise some control in your own environment. Trying to control her husband, that is not going to work. Trying to control an addict, it never works. But what can you control? And so you're taking that drive to find safety and just looking for it in ways where you have a chance of finding it.
Yes, I totally agree. Um, do you so looking back at that, do you think that a 12-step program is a useful tool for a partner of a sex addict?
I have talked to a lot of women who have found a lot of help and support through 12-step groups. I think it's dependent upon the group. I've heard of really good groups and not so good groups. And on the partner's ability to take what helps her and to leave the rest. The fellowship that occurs within a 12-step group, I think, is its most helpful aspect.
Yes.
Sex addiction, dealing with this in your life, it is so isolating. So any contact with other people in similar situations, for a lot of partners, it's a lifeline.
Mm-hmm.
It's what keeps them afloat. So, so in that respect, I think they can be really helpful if it's a healthy group.
Yes.
They can also offer some really helpful tips on how to cope. And they also support the message that the partner didn't cause the addiction and so cannot cure the addiction in their partner. I think that's really a helpful message.
Yes.
But I don't think they regularly recognize or validate the level of harm or trauma, and in particular the emotional abuse that can occur within a marriage with a sex addict.
Yes.
And again, like I said, my main difference is that first step. My first step with clients is to help them find the power to help themselves and to find a sense of safety.
Yes, I agree. Uh, Barbara, can you describe your trauma model of treatment for partners of sex addicts and kind of tell us how it varies from the addiction model?
Okay. Well, like I said before, I start with the trauma and the resulting safety needs. So I validate the terror and the fear, the insecurity, all as natural responses, to that betrayal of trust.
Yes.
I don't frame the partner's behavior as codependent, but reasonable, when you consider it's a response to a trauma, while at the same time gently helping them see the behaviors that are not helping them achieve their goals. So we work to help them find ways they can find safety outside of the relationship with the addict, especially early in recovery. There's nothing safe there.
Yes.
So I help them look, maybe within themselves, in their faith, in their family, friends, in their ability to care for themselves, but to find other ways that they're going to be able to experience increased safety. I find that I give a lot of information and help the partner identify what her options are while processing her emotions. It's pretty here and now focused. Now, the addiction model will look a lot at early childhood issues or family of origin issues pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
They will say that what happened in your past led you to find and marry a sex addict. And their trauma work will center mostly around exploring early traumatic life events.
Yes.
Those things that, in their view, set you up to marry a sex addict. Well, in my work, I don't address past trauma or family of origin issues until the current trauma and its symptoms are addressed and the client, the partner, starts to feel a sense of safety in their own current situation. So that needs to happen first. And then we may spend some time working on past trauma as it relates to maybe some learned ways that they respond to feeling threatened or responding to conflict situations.
Yes.
So we deal with the current trauma first. and then look at maybe other places where past trauma, past hurts, past betrayals may have gotten triggered in this one. But I don't assume that they've had a horrific trauma history. For a lot of the partners I work with, there is no horrific trauma history. This is it, and
Yes.
it's horrible. So for me, my model focuses on the partner's strengths, not on a disease. It's not pathology focused, but it's on her strengths and helping her and identify and increase her ability to care for herself. So I really see it as an empowerment kind of model.
Yes, and that's wonderful. Well, Barbara, unfortunately, our time is up for today. I do appreciate you taking the time to share your ideas with our listeners. Barbara will join us again next week, and we will talk about some of the reactions that occur when we discover our partner's sexual addiction. Until then, this is Joanne Russell at marriedtoasexaddict.com, reminding everyone that you are not alone. Come visit this site often and share your stories and comments on this very complex issue of sexual addiction. Until next time we meet, take care and be safe.